Hi, everyone. Reyes Ramirez here with Fresh Arts. Thank you for tuning in and welcome. If you haven't been here before, this is Fresh Arts, and what we do is we provide we provide resources to local artists, particularly in Houston, but through our digital platforms, through our online series, one that you're watching right now, our workshop series, it goes much beyond that. And so thank you for coming in today. If you've been here before, thank you for tuning in again. And so today, usually for Thursdays, we do more workshop-based stuff. And so last time we had a really great discussion and workshop with Medley Inc. And so today what we're going to do is you're going to have me, Reyes Ramirez, with our virtual workshops. And so it's going to be, as it states right there, an intro to grant proposal writing. And so just to kind of give you some background on today's workshop, to set up some parameters. So number one, as I said, my name is Reyes. And so I'm a writer, I'm a poet, fiction writer, essayist, all that good stuff. And so this is stuff that I've been working on. This is stuff that I've been doing for a minute. And so like what I do today is stuff that has worked for me. And so in the actual workshop presentation, and I'll actually give you some tips on what's worked for me, and hopefully that'll work for you too. And so today, accompanying me, where it's just not me, we have a colleague of mine and a great artist in her own right, who's also got some feathers on her cap as well. When she comes on the screen, I'll be sure to say her name and give her as best of an introduction as I can. And there she is. It is the Julia Barbosa Landois.
Hello.
So do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. My name is Julia Barbosa Landois, and I am the grant writer at Fresh Arts. As Reyes said, I'm also a visual and performing artist. So I do grant writing for my personal art practice and also as my day job. They're both a little bit different processes, but I feel like they both strengthen each other and have informed each other.
Absolutely. And so the way today is going to work is that I'm going to go through a PowerPoint with a workshop that are usually done in person, but with the COVID-19 crisis, obviously we're doing this virtually and online, where I'm going to share best practices that's worked for me. But just to not give you a singular voice, Julia will chime in with her advice, and Julia, feel free to either counter or add on, or maybe provide a different angle.
Sure.
However you feel, the information, you react to the information. So just so the audience doesn't get one voice, because and I'll go into the PowerPoint itself. Every grant is different in its own right. Every discipline, every craft has different parameters, has different needs. And so, we just don't want to give you that one voice. And so, are you ready, Julia?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go through the PowerPoint. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in. There will be breaks in the PowerPoint where I can take questions if they're particularly pertinent to what's going on. If not, we're going to have a discussion at the end where we'll obviously do a Q&A, but also just have a discussion on other experiences we've had. And so here we go. All right. Can you see everything?
There we go.
Cool. All right. So as it states, intro to proposal writing: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And so the purpose of this particular workshop will be to provide an anchor text that can be modified upon depending on the grant application. And so what is an anchor text? In my definition, or at least for the purposes of this workshop, an anchor text is a text that is read, used, and referred to often to change and edit, because it can be used as a model / starting point to create answers to a variety of application questions. And the reason why I'm using this particular model and what we're doing today is because every grant application is so different. and each of them ask questions in their own way. There may even be some applications, in my experience, even asked for the same things, but they ask them in a different way. And so it would not be, at least in good practice or in good conscience on my end, to tell you this is the one way to do something. This is a tactic that I've used in my regular practice of applying for grants and fellowships and residencies, all that good stuff. And it's worked for me. Hopefully it'll work for you. But again, the main thing is that you don't want to have to recreate the wheel every single time you apply, or you want to make that process faster. And so if you've never applied before, I think this will be really helpful. If you've applied before and you've got some things under your belt, hopefully this will give you a different angle. Julia, is there anything that you want to add on to this, or maybe in your own experience, maybe you had some differences, or maybe some likenesses in yours?
I would say this is great advice to start out with. And it's what I do for both of the kinds of grants that I write. You start with something, and then with each project you build on it. And also for your one idea, the more grants that you apply for, I find that you use the anchor text, it changes, it evolves, but also your grant proposals get better the more you do them and the more you work on this one idea, because you're developing it a little bit more each time.
Thank you. Yeah, that's totally a different facet that I think is in the back of my head, but you stated it perfectly. Yeah, it's something that you work on, right? And so it's often you change and edit it often because again, it depends on the grant, and also depends on your own experience, where maybe you get feedback from one place and it's like you tweak this part of it and you tweak that. And so you definitely want to have something you refer back to. So kind of defining what a proposal is, and I think this is kind of important. So a proposal is an act of putting forward or stating something for consideration. And I state this because I think it's really, in my experience, at least as an artist or a writer that works with different communities and works with different writers, you'll have these things where it'll sound like a great idea when you're talking to your friends or you're talking to fellow artists or colleagues, and you're like, I have this really great idea, blah, 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 blah. And they're going to be like, cool, great, go for it. But it's going to go further than that. It's going to be something for consideration. So the question then is like, what is being considered and what is it being considered for? Right. And so now you get into this very different conversation of, rather than like, oh, this is a neat idea, yeah, let's do it. It's going to become like, oh, okay, so like, how can I prove to someone that this idea that I have is worth funding or is worth allocating resources to? And that's a totally different conversation. And so that's something to keep in mind. And so another really huge question that comes up is, who is doing the considering? So your grant proposal or your grant in general will usually go to a panel. And a panel is usually composed of several individuals from various backgrounds that recommend applicants for funding, who are either experts, former grantees, and or volunteers. So you should write your proposal in common, simple language that can be understood by a room full of people as equally as possible. Mainly because you just really never know who's going to be reading your proposal. So me as a writer, I might be like, oh yes, I have this really great idea for a book that's going to go into the hegemonical history of using the patriarchal modes of publication and really peer into the historiography of one's, you know what I mean? And so like in some context, maybe in an academic context or in a writing context or in any other context, people might understand that, but you're assuming that a whole room of people is going to know what you're talking about when you use certain words. And so you're going to want to write your proposal in common, simple language. If you're applying to an art grant, right, one that is like for many disciplines, right, not just one discipline, right? Me as a writer, then I have to consider that maybe there's a visual artist and a dancer and an actor on the panel. And are they going to understand what I'm saying? Julia, is there anything you want to add, or is there anything in your experience that you've seen that you want to add on with? Or
yeah, I think also considering that someone on the panel may not even be in the arts field at all. For example, if you are working on a public art project proposal. Somebody on the panel might be an engineer, and they don't care at all about art jargon. They want to know that your sculpture isn't going to fall down, you know? So you want to think about who may be there reading it, as much information that you can get about the criteria that they're using. And it's not the time to get, as Reyes exemplified, to get like really flowery and jargony. Like you said, it's just the time to be clear.
And Julia, I think the only exception maybe I could think about to this is that, let's say, like, again, as a writer, like if I apply to, let's say, like a Stegner fellowship, which is like only for writers, it is only particularly for, let's say, fiction writers. Mm-hmm. I think that's the only time I've ever felt like okay using writing jargon. I don't know if you've had that in your experience where it's like a specific grant or fellowship for a specific craft.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that's the only exception. But for otherwise, again, you should write it in simple, common language that as many people as you can get to understand it, the better. Like Julia said, it could be people who do not work in the arts at all. And so, you know, this is going to come up as a point later, but it's going to come into like maybe how you edit yourself and how you share it with your community. And so a very important rule of grant proposal writing is to read the guidelines. I know that might seem obvious, but it's really important because if you're going to use the same anchor text or you're going to want funding for the same project, you can't assume that every single grant is going to be, the funds can be used the same way. So for example, maybe one grant, it'll pay for this, but it won't pay for equipment, for example. And you really need a nice camera. But you get the grant and they're like, actually, you can't use that to buy equipment. This is only to pay artists, right? And so therefore, you just kind of submit an application to something that can't even be applied to you, right? And so when you read the guidelines from there, you should have an idea of what to propose in mind. In any case, your idea should be possible, feasible in the context of the grant and fulfill the grant's purpose. Again, if the grant has like a communal aspect where you have to present something to the public and that is not in your grant application or proposal, then it's probably not going to get chosen. Whereas if you apply for another one, it doesn't have a communal aspect to it. It's just for you to, you have unrestricted funds to just use at your disposal. Maybe it's not as relevant, but again, you have to read the guidelines. Julia, is there anything you would like to add to that? Or
I think your point about how the guidelines relate to the budget is a really good one. And to be thinking about the budget while you're doing your proposal, even if you don't want to get into the numbers specifically, just start out just by making a list. Make a list of the things that you think you want to pay for. And then you go through the guidelines of the different grants that you're looking at and see if any of those can cover the things that are on your list. And maybe some of those things on that list are things that you could talk about a little bit in your proposal. They also like to have a little bit of an explanation there. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk a little later about with some other specific strategic tips, and research is one of them. And this is the beginning of that, is like really comb through those guidelines. They also may be looking at things like they want to have a funding match. And so, so you're looking at a grant that if you get this grant, you have to be able to prove that you can match their funds with a grant from somewhere else or some other kind of funding that's guaranteed. And so if you don't have a way to guarantee that other funding, then you're going to be wasting your time doing this one that requires a match. So you want to maximize your time because we all, as artists and people with day jobs and people trying to work on a lot of projects, have a lot of things going on. So you start by combing through so that you know that your time is being spent well.
Thank you. So usually, when this is done in person, This is where a writing kind of workshop would occur, but feel free to do this on your own time, or you can do it now if you'd like. We're just going to kind of breeze through this, or rather, I'm gonna kind of go through it, explain the logic behind these pre-writing questions, and obviously you can do them at your own time. And I'll show you later how to access a toolkit that has these questions. Or again, this video will be archived, and so you can rewatch this and pause it however you want. But let me just explain the logic of these pre-writing questions, as I would if you were right here in front of me. And so brainstorming pre-writing. So one question that really ask yourself, if again this is assuming you have nothing on paper, this is all in your head. These are questions that are going to hopefully help you narrow or put something on the page. So number one, what are you passionate about? And I know that might be a really simple, basic question, but the reason why I asked is because I'm sure you have many things that you're passionate about. But again, when we're putting in the context of who's doing the considering, right, or what are you putting forward to be considered, we're gonna have to put some words to things, right? And so, what are you passionate about? So for me, for example, I'm passionate about writing. I'm passionate about community. I'm passionate about helping, about education. I'm passionate about, let's say, just some random like turtles or beer or like pro wrestling, let's say, for example, right? And so like, how does that affect your creative practice? So let's say I made that list, right? Let's say like, oh, I love writing and I love professional wrestling. All right. Maybe you talk to your friends and they're like, oh, that's cool. That's, those are two things that, I've seen you like. That's great. But then the question then has to extend beyond that, right? What are you more than just about what are you passionate about? It then has to go into how does that affect your creative practice? And so like, then it's not enough to say that you like those things. It's really, how do they affect the real world or outside? Rather than just being in your head, how does that actually how are those interests put into action, right? And so like my creative practice would be, well, I love poetry, so I sit down and I write, and I have pro wrestling. So, I mean, yeah, I watch wrestling, but do they really interact with each other? No, not really. But wait, what if I were to combine those two things? What if I said, oh, I have a blog dedicated to this, to pro wrestling or whatever. I have a series of poems about historical figures who are wrestlers, right? So then it starts to affect my creative practice, right? It's something I dedicate energy to, which then goes into what is a project you want to do with your art that goes beyond your usual practice, right? So maybe your usual practice, so I'll go myself as a writer as an example. So my usual practice is that I sit down at a desk or at a coffee shop. Well, not so much anymore, but let's say I sit down on my desk at home. I brew a nice cup of coffee. I sit down in front of my computer and I type. I'll usually listen to music and blah, 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 right? That is my usual practice. That is how I usually get my art or my craft done. But now it's a question of what is something that I want to do that goes beyond that? So if that is my usual practice, then how am I taking it outside of that? So let's say I do like writing about pro wrestling. Well, what if I wanted to write like a book on the history of professional wrestling in Houston, right? So that would require me to go out and do research. It would require me to read journals, maybe read some articles, watch some videos, some documentaries, if any exist, or I need to do this and that, right? Well, what if I wanted to do a reading, right? Or if I wanted to do a chapbook, right? Like a little book of poems or a little book. So now those are things that go beyond my usual practice, and that's a project. So for visual artists, that might mean like, okay, you paint in your studio, but now you want to do an exhibition, right? That is beyond your usual practice. And this is key as we'll get into it later. So what do you need to accomplish this art/project? So let's say I want to do something related with my writing and pro wrestling, and let's say I want to put on an event, right? So what do I need to accomplish this art project, this event? Well, and I wanted to put on a chapbook with it. So it's like, well, what do I need? I need time. I need some funds to pay myself so I can maybe dedicate myself to this. I need an event space. I need paper. I need ink. I need printing costs. I need, right? So you want to make a list of things that you need to accomplish this art project that goes beyond your usual practice. So as you can see, hopefully this is building a bigger idea as you answer these questions, right? And so like, do you need materials? Do you need skills? Do you need space? Like, so if you're, so for materials, let's say like, yeah, if I want to print a book, so that means I need paper. That means I need ink. That means I need maybe a ruler, however you want to lay this thing out, right? Or if you're a painter, maybe you need certain paints. If you're a sculptor, maybe you need a new material that is, you know, outside of your usual purview, like, oh, I work with wood, but I really want to work with this particular set of grains or woods, however you want, right? Skills. So let's say like I want to create that book. Well, I have no experience, let's say in graphic design. So I need someone who does layout and design, right? So that would pay, I would need to pay them, right? Because that is not a skill I have. Or maybe if you're a theater, you're in theater, you need someone to build a stage because you want to do an outdoor performance. Again, I don't know how to build a stage. You may not know, but maybe you know someone who does. Or is it space? So like if you want to do a film screening, you do not have a nice projector, you do not have a big screen. So you're gonna need a space that has those things. And so that's another thing to consider. If I want to do a reading, another example, what is a space that has a microphone, speakers, seats? So this is kind of like a formal question now. It's like, what disciplines does your project engage in? And that's an important question to ask yourself. I know it might be maybe limiting in terms of like what verbiage you have to use or what you have to ascribe yourself to. But the reason why I put this is because grants, they'll usually be very specific, where they'll say we only fund visual arts projects, or we only fund literary arts projects, or performing arts, right? They're going to use those labels, they're going to use those terms. And so it's important to kind of often think about it in those terms if you're going to apply to grants or residencies or fellowships, because they will be using those labels in my experience. And so you don't have to be limited to one. You can say like, oh, mine is going to be this pro wrestling project. Well, there's going to be some literary and there's going to be some performance aspects to it. And 5, who are some people or what spaces would you like to work with to present your work? So again, going back to the earlier question of what do you need, right? Who are some people or what spaces would you like to work with? Let's say if I wanted to put on, let's say a wrestling show with my writing, well, that means I would need maybe some experienced wrestlers, right? And I would maybe need a venue or space that could hold a ring, have speakers, have a sound system, have a place for me to read, and have the wrestlers be able to, let's say, warm up or like be in the back, get ready, right? And so now what we're doing is we started with just a passion, and hopefully these questions segue into a project. Julia, is there anything you want to add or like counter any of this, or anything you want to add to any of this?
No, I think it's great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. No, it's all good. I appreciate it. And so, yeah, so these are things to consider when you're just first starting out. Or let's say you've done one before, a project before, but now you're just trying to think about a completely new project. Hopefully these questions get you to that place of proposing a new project. So now that we have some ideas, it's a matter of forming these thoughts into a proposal, right? Something to be considered for funding. So this is going to go beyond the extra step of just having an idea, having a project, because now you're going to ask people to pretty much give you money for it. So keep in mind that each proposal should show why you are worth investing funds in by demonstrating your capability to complete a unique, innovative project. And so, so a complete innovative project, meaning that like, I think there are some ways in like funding, when you're asking for funding, a lot of grants or institutions will want something that maybe hasn't been done before. And maybe that's going to get more eyes on your project. If it's something that hasn't been traditionally done, it's sort of like if I were to say, oh, I just want to do chapbook of poems, just poems that I wrote, right? That's going to be way different than, let's say, if I were to be more specific. If I were to say, oh, I want to do a chapbook of poems that address endangered species, and so I'm going to do poems based on these charts, blah, blah, blah. So you see, like, it makes your project more unique and more innovative, and it's probably going to get more eyes. Oh, wow, someone's persistent. And so some writing that we're going to do with those things in mind is, now imagine you are applying for a grant. Answer the following questions. And you don't have to do this again, do this at your own time, but I'm going to go into the logic of why you should answer these questions. So number one, who is applying? 2, what is the money for? 3, when will the project occur? 4, where will the project be exhibited? 5, why is this project necessary? And 6, how will the project be carried out? So the reason why I said who is applying is because when you're putting something forward to be considered, it's going to be a different story if I say, hi, I'm Reyes Ramirez and I want some money to write. People are going to be like, okay, cool, I don't care. But if you're more specific, or if you use your words wisely and you say, I'm Reyes Ramirez, I'm an award-winning poet and writer who with a plethora of experience of organizing events and readings and chapbooks, and looking for funds to create this project, right? It's going to make myself seem really like capable of stewarding these funds, right? Of being a good steward of these funds. So 2 is, what is the money for? So the more detail that you're able to give in a short amount of time, the better, right? So what is the money for? If I were to just go up to you and say, hey, give me $500. You're going to be like, your first question is probably going to be like, well, for what, right? And so I think one thing to consider is, what is the money for? And the more specific you are, the better. If I were to say, give me $500 and I'll do X, Y, and Z, you're probably going to consider it more. Doesn't mean you say yes, but you're probably going to consider it, or at least think about it, right? When will the project occur? I ask this because a lot of grants, they'll have timeframes in which you'll have to complete that project. So in my experience, you don't have to get specifically like it's going to happen June 30th. June 30th. I was going to say June 38th, but June 30th. You don't have to get that specific. It can be like, I'm going to do it during this month, or I want to do it during this season. But the reason why is, again, some grants just have that time frame in which you have to complete something. 4 is, where will the project be exhibited? A lot of grants have public components, public-facing components, and so they'll want to know, like, okay, do you have a long-term plan of how this is going to play out? Right. And so where will be the project be exhibited? So if you're doing a film, right, when is it going to be screened? Where? And that usually is tied to if you're a good steward of your funds, right? If you haven't thought about the long-term goals or how it's going to be completed, then they're going to be like, well, did you think about this far enough in advance? And also whether or not you're capable of putting on the project. So that's another thing to consider. 5, why is this project necessary? This is kind of an X factor. So you're gonna have to convince a room full of people that your idea is unique. It's different. It's something that hasn't maybe happened before, or if it has, maybe it's putting something, a conversation in a new light, or you're shining a light on something on a conversation that has not been paid attention to or has been skipped over. Right, the more it's going to create, like another word I could use is like, it creates a sense of urgency of why this project needs to happen with you, right? And I'll get into maybe that in a little bit or more of what that means. And 6, finally, how will the project be carried out? So the difference between how and what, the how being that it's going to be that aspect of the proposal of the grant where the difference between, let's say, a virtual exhibition versus an in-person exhibition, right? The how. So the what is for like, oh, it's going to pay for the space. It's going to pay for the material to hang up the work. It's going to pay for this, that, for the project to be seen physically. But if it's a virtual exhibition, well, it's going to be carried out through an online app or software that I need to pay a subscription for. And if I want the really fancy package, I need to pay, or to show the art in a certain level of rendering, I need to pay this amount, right? And so that's the how, right? It's how will the project be carried out. Before we get into like the example proposal, Julia, is there anything you want to add, or anything you want to clarify? Anything that maybe you want clarification on, or you want to add clarification to?
I think it's good. I'll elaborate when I get to my thing, but yeah.
Thank you.
You always do a great job, Reyes.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you. And so these, if you've worked in journalism, or if you've written some articles, you'll recognize that these questions have been kind of adapted, at least my experience when I learned journalism, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. The theory behind that is that if you don't answer most of those questions in the first paragraph, the reader will probably not read the whole article. So it's kind of been adapted from that. So let's put them in order to create an anchor text. So the X factor of every proposal is the ability to complete a narrative in such small, concise verbiage, right? So some places will give you, the 750 to 1,000 words. Some will give you only 150. The shortest I've seen is like 50 words. The biggest I've seen is like 1,000. And even if, let's say, you get that 1,000 word mark, even then, if the first paragraph is not interesting, they're probably not going to read the whole thing. And I'll get into that. Maybe Julie, you can speak about that later in your experience. But to get through this, right? So this is a pro wrestling event and literary event that I've gotten funding for that will hopefully, illuminate sort of what some of the points that I'm making hopefully will put a good perspective on them. So number one, right? Houston writer Reyes Ramirez is partnering with Houston professional wrestling company Blank Wrestling. I don't want to name them too much. So Houston writer Reyes Ramirez is partnering with Houston professional wrestling company Blank Wrestling, right? So who is applying? It's Reyes Ramirez, and Reyes Ramirez partnering with the Houston professional wrestling company. To deliver a unique artistic experience, a literary reading and professional wrestling event. Right? So how will this project be carried out? Well, it's going to be a literary reading and professional wrestling event. Ramirez will read an excerpt from a novella that features a family of pro wrestlers. Interspersed throughout the story are professional wrestling matches that are written in detail. Right? So now you know exactly how the project will be carried out. Blank Wrestling will provide wrestlers to act out these, and I highlight that in green for number 2 because that's what the money's going to be for, right? That's revealing in what way how the money will be used. It'll be to pay these wrestlers to act out these moments in the story to give a live interpretation of the text. And that section illuminates more upon how the money will be used, or how the project will be carried out, rather. Blank Wrestling has been putting on wrestling events in Houston for nearly 20 years. They have done collaborative efforts with other artistic disciplines, including their consulting work for stage performance at Blank. Right, so one that adds more to the who is applying, right? It adds more credibility. It adds more experience to who is applying, right? And so now it's not just a random person putting things together. It's actually like a series of, or a set of experienced people putting on an event. So 3, in Houston, right? So that gives you an idea of where, right? So it's not going to be, in this context, it has to be in Houston, but now it's going to be in Houston, including their consulting work for stage performance. And I put that as a where because then that, I meant that as a where. Because then that sets up that that it could happen at places they've worked at before, right? Where they put their events at. And so that already adds credibility to the idea that, okay, well, this has happened before in this way, it can happen again. So number 5 is, why is the project necessary? Well, the mix of the literary and the professional wrestling will create a unique experience that exists outside of theater and or the performing arts, as the literary and the performance aspects will enhance the other. The risks involved for professional wrestlers interpreting the text of the story to create the same dramatic tension while staying true to their aesthetic and capabilities, as they are not inherently actors, right? So hopefully this answers why is this project necessary, because it's going to create a whole new experience that maybe you've never seen before. Right. And so that is why this needs to happen and why I need to do it. So hopefully that's convincing enough. Right. And number 2, another way to answer number 2 is the writer will have to work with the wrestlers. So it's going to be a paying for me to work with them, for my time to work with them, to match the performance through reading. Right. So I mixed up some of my colors here, or my numbers, to match the performance through reading. So that is going to that answers the what is the money for, and how will the project be carried out. The reading can be done alone, as can the wrestling, but combined will open new ideas on the capabilities of storytelling and words of performance. Each audience member will receive a program with the story printed inside to follow along and to also have a keepsake. So hopefully what's been answered is, again, all those questions. And one thing you'll notice is that they don't have to be in order, right? If you answer too much in order, it might come off as blocky, as clunky. So write naturally, write however you want to write that, but just make sure whatever you're writing, at the very basis of my experience, answers those questions. Because again, this could be an introduction to a larger, right, explanation for a grant. This adds some hints to other aspects of a grant application. I'll get into what that means later. But the point being that, like, once you answer all those questions, I think the more compelling, and I think the more an application panel will understand your project and maybe get more of them on your side. Because again, the point of this is to provide a kind of baseline for people to understand your project. Right, so again, just to reiterate, not every application is the same. Some applications may even ask for the same information, but in for different ways. This paragraph may serve as an anchor text that can be expanded upon, whittled down, or broken up. Thus, consider this proposal as a guide and or jumping off point. For example, a grant application may ask for a timeline, which is hinted at in the above proposal. I can take that hint and expand upon it more specifically. In other words, you can take a piece of information from the anchor text and adapt accordingly. So let's say for a timeline, well, the timeline will have to include me having the story, so I have that, working with the wrestlers to act out the story. So therefore, it's going to take rehearsal. It's going to take a timeline for me to work with the wrestlers, and then culminate in a stage performance, right? So then the timeline is going to have to secure that stage. We have to secure the rehearsal, and then actually put on the event. So before we move forward, Julia, is there anything you want to add, or is there anything you want to address?
Sure. I just wanted to add a little kind of technical tip, which is we're talking about this anchor text. You started out talking about how different applications have different word allowances. Sorry. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but sorry. So save every version of this anchor text that you have modified. Maybe that sounds obvious, but a lot of times, especially if you're doing things last minute, or if you're working on an application that uses a text box, that you're typing directly into the text box rather than uploading documents, you're just trying to knock it out and get it done. But save every version so that next time when you do it, you've got the long version, the short version, the medium version. It's just a really helpful practice. The few minutes that it takes for you to take those versions and make a Word document and just kind of organize it for yourself are going to translate into a lot of saved time later when you're making more applications.
Thank you. That's a really great tip. So side note, a project summary versus a project narrative. This is a common thing that usually pops up. So this anchor text can also be used as a project summary. And a project summary is a succinct and accurate description of the proposed project and provides the project's broad objectives and specific aims. However, it should not be confused with a project narrative. A project summary can be expanded into a project narrative, and the project narrative is often much longer than a summary. So project narratives tend to include a statement of the problem or purpose, the objectives of the project, background info about what's already known, and information on any research and or history that supports the project's feasibility and or necessity. So those are usually about 500 to 1,000 words. Again, it depends on the application. So applying the anchor text, right? So for example, HAA asks about community impact. The final sentence, the why, can be expanded upon to answer that question. The how sentence can provide a basis for a budget narrative, right? So like, what do I need to pay the wrestlers? What type of paper am I going to use for the chapbook, right? How big is the chapbook going to be, and how does that justify a price tag of whatever I put in the budget? So different applications may even ask for a longer description, which again can be built from this anchor text. So in closing, the anchor text is a paragraph summary that can quickly tell the story of your project to a room full of people who will then decide if it is to be funded. There is no perfect application, and many factors play in deciding what projects may be funded. Example, a diversity of disciplines, backgrounds, alignment with grant's purpose, and the panel's holistic experience and background, etc. And we can get into that later in my discussion with Julia into what that really means when I say that there is no perfect application in it, and it really depends upon these other X factors that you just do not have any control over. And so one example I can provide really quickly is, let's say, and I've been on panels before, I've served on different panels, and let's say that you're in a room with 9 other people, you're one of 10, and you only get 2 days to see this information and to review it for funding, and your application happens to be, and there's 100 applications, and your application is number 97. It's not dead last, but it's also not really at the forefront, right? And so maybe at the end of that second day, I'm tired. I've been away from home. I just want to get this over with, and it just so. But again, I'm not saying that it always inherently puts you at an odds, but I'm just saying that there's just some things you cannot control. And so that concludes my presentation. I'm gonna cede some time to Julia to go over some other things in her experience that have worked, and then we'll go into a Q&A and a discussion. So let me go ahead and back out of here. And bam. How you doing?
All right. So I think do we have a slide for what I was going to talk about? There we go. All right. Oh, here, let's see. All right. This looks great. These are just a few application strategies. And number one is something that we already touched on. I see a question that came in, and as soon as I'm done with these points, we can talk about this one about the relationship with the grant panel. So thank you, Terry. Number one is thoroughly research all of your grant opportunities to make sure they're the right fit for your practice and your projects. This is a time-consuming process, but again, the time that you put in on the front end to do this research is really going to help you maximize your time during the application process. First you want to spend some time and look for a bunch of opportunities, and then you research the opportunities to see what's right for you. Some great places to start are the Fresh Arts Artist Opportunity Board. Sorry, I have to use 2 screens here, so I'm looking to the side. The signing up for the Fresh Arts Artist Resource Newsletter, the Creative Capital mailing list. If you're in Texas, then Glass Tire posts opportunities. Also, look at artists that you like and that also have a practice that is similar to yours. Look at their resumes and see what grants they've gotten and what awards they've gotten, and if those are things that can apply to the projects that you're doing. So there's lots of ways to look first. Look at what kinds of work they fund, so you find one, you think it's going to fit your project, look at the artists that they funded last year. And that gives you a great way to look at what kind of projects they fund, at what point in their career are the artists that they're funding. Maybe they only fund emerging artists, or it looks like everyone that they're funding maybe has 20 years of experience. And so wherever you are on that spectrum, it gives you a little bit more idea of your chances of being funded by that particular grant. Number 2 is make a list of your project ideas. It's okay to only have one idea at a time, but if you have more than one idea, some grants are more appropriate for some projects than others, and so once you have a list of the things that the project ideas that you know you have, then you can go through that list that you researched and kind of compare the two and see which projects go the best with which grants, and group them accordingly. You know, if there are grants that don't fit anything that you're doing right now, you just save it for later because you're probably going to have a great idea for it later. 3 is make yourself a grants calendar. This is like the research. You take a little time in the beginning, and then it saves you a lot of time later when you are looking at deadlines. Every once in a while, something comes up at the last minute that you want to apply for, but it's really great to have a list with the deadlines on a calendar so that they don't take you by surprise and you have all the time that you need to work on your proposal. Nobody wants to be caught the night before working on a really long grant proposal because they forgot about the deadline. It also helps you, just like the research in terms of who's being funded and what kind of projects are being funded, the calendar helps you figure out what grants to apply to which project because you're thinking about your project timeline. Let's say that you want to fund something and it has to happen at a very specific time of year. That's going to affect which grants you're applying for. You want to get multiple grants for a really big project. Well, then you want to make sure that the grants you're applying for are on a similar timeline so that you're spending all that money kind of around the same time to get your project done the way that it needs to be. And then the 4th one is look for grants to fit your ideas, not the other way around, usually. So trying to come up with new ideas for each new grant proposal can not only be exhausting, but it can also waste some time that's maybe better spent on just making your work as an artist. You need good documentation of your work for grant applications to prove that you can successfully complete a project. And if you're spending all of your time applying for things all over the place that aren't really focused, then you're using up that time where you could actually be making work and documenting it and making a better case for why you could get one grant in the first place. You'll also be writing for proposals for ideas that aren't fully developed, which sometimes is okay, but that can reflect in your proposal. And so, you know, that's opposed to an idea that you've had for a while, you've written your anchor text, you've been thinking about it, and it's changed over time and gotten better. That's going to make a better proposal. You don't have to apply for everything all the time also, and it's important to remind yourself that we all want to get great opportunities, and we want to get those lines on our resume so that we can get even greater opportunities, and then it kind of feeds itself and you want to apply for stuff all the time. But if you don't have an idea ready for an opportunity, that doesn't mean that you're never going to get that opportunity again. You put it on your calendar and you wait for the next round for when you're more ready and you have a better proposal, and you have a better chance with that better proposal of getting this grant in the first place. You have to do what works for you. Some people like to work in cycles. So they go through a period of intensely making, composing, choreographing, writing, and then they'll switch over for a little while and do some documentation and sort of the admin part of their practice. And then they do that for a couple months and then they switch back to making. Not everybody, you know, you have to do what works for you. Sometimes you get a flash of inspiration when an opportunity comes up and you just have to run with it and apply and just see what happens. But for the most part, you don't want to get caught up in always trying to do the next best thing and the next and the next and the next, to the detriment of your practice that is happening in the here and now, and being a maker of performances, a maker of visual art, a maker of music, whatever it is that you do. So I think we're ready for questions now. Does that sound good, Reyes?
Yeah.
Do you have any questions about that, or?
No, I think those are really great points. I think the one thing maybe I would like to add is that like some projects, depending on them, you can plan them out where maybe you get funding for a certain aspect of the project and you apply again to continue it. So like, for example, that I've seen that with filmmakers where they'll be like, okay, I got a $10,000 grant to fund the movie for this amount of filming, but I'm going to apply to other ones for this second round of filming or like edits or, but in terms of like visual arts or in writing, I've seen like you apply for a residency to begin the project and you do that. And then you apply for a grant to actually do the project or what have you. Yeah.
So I see a question from Terry. Can you blindly write a grant without relationships with the panel? Yes, definitely. For the most part, the panel is secret. You know, they may release the names of the people on the panel after the fact, but sometimes they don't even do that. And so you may not even know who is on the panel at all. And even if you have a relationship with the institution that is administering the grant, they're often getting panelists that are outside of their institution to look at the grants anyway. So you don't need to worry about establishing some kind of relationship before you jump in and do it.
Yeah, to add on to that, a lot of the applications I apply to actually say, I will say that in the writing world, they explicitly say if you know anyone on the panel, you either cannot apply or they'll ask the panelists to recuse themselves from looking at your application. So I think for the most part, you're going to apply to stuff where you don't know anyone on the panel. And even if, let's say you're like, I don't know, like I know people who work at Houston Arts Alliance who I would consider friends, but they're not the ones going to be looking at my stuff. They're not the ones that are going to be looking at my application. So really it's like, as Julia said, a lot of the times it's going to be they don't even reveal who the panel is.
And on the panelist side, because I've also sat on panels, sometimes they don't get your name either. So they can recuse themselves if they know you. However, they might get it totally blind. And so all they're reading is your proposal and they have no person to connect it to. So it's working that way on both sides.
So we have another question from Marci, who is asking, how do you recommend asking a funder for feedback? If you do or don't receive funding, does everyone offer feedback?
That's a great question. And I even wrote it down here, which is, yes, you definitely want to ask for feedback. Not everyone will give it. Not everyone will give it in a timely way. But if you reach out and give a personal email or sometimes even a phone call, there are people who will give you feedback on your proposal. It depends on how much the panel wrote in terms of their internal comments during the process as to what they can give back to you. So they may be able to give you back a whole page of comments. They may be able to give you back just a couple sentences giving you a basic idea of, oh, you didn't fit such and such requirement, that's why. But always ask for feedback because it's really helpful, and every application is a learning process for you to get better for the next one.
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely always ask. The only caveat would be is that, I have run into situations where they don't respond or they don't give any feedback, or they're like, no, we don't offer feedback. So that happens too. So, just anyone else, I mean, just be ready for that as well. Yeah.
If you can't control whether they're going to give you feedback or not, but before or after you submit your proposal, you can also get feedback from your community. Don't forget to use your friends and peers, your colleagues as a resource. Have somebody read your proposal and say, what do you think I should change before I submit this? Or this got rejected. What do you think? How do you think I could have improved it? That's really helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah, same thing. I would say that, like, depending on the grant, I mean, if I'm applying to like a general grant for like for all kinds of disciplines, I've shown my grant application to someone outside of my discipline. And I ask them, do you get what I'm saying? And sometimes even like the yes or no is like speaks with it for itself. If someone reads my thing and they're like, no, I don't have any idea what you're talking about, that within itself is already like, okay, all right, I need to tweak that. Or yeah, just even getting like those simple like grammar or whatever. Again, it never hurts to get someone to look at your proposal. And again, depending on the application, if it's let's say if you're a writer and you're applying for a writing grant or something like that, show it to another writer that you may know. Yeah, the more eyes you have on it, the more people that you had eyes on it. The one way I like to think about it is like the more people on your side, the less people you have to convince. So, yeah. I don't think we have any questions as of right now, but just to kind of maybe get the conversation before our time is up. So in my experience, I think one thing that can be frustrating for people is they'll get a rejection, and they'll get rejected once, then twice, then 3 times. And some people might be like, okay, well, that's it. I'm done. Like I'm done with these people. I'm done. And it's frustrating, blah, blah, blah. But in my case, I've applied to something like 3 times and I got it on the 4th time. And so, Julia, I guess, could you maybe give an example of like if that's ever happened to you or any advice for that?
Yeah, definitely. That's happened to me. I've been rejected and asked for feedback. And then the next time got it. But also when we were talking about before the panelists and your relationship with the panelists change every year. And so, you know, you don't have control over who the panelists are or what their reaction might be to the way that you work or the content of your work. And maybe the next year there's someone who just loves your work amazingly. And that's what puts you over the edge.
Yeah. Again, yeah, you might apply one year and maybe it's a panelist of all, I don't know, like maybe like if I'm a writer and I'm applying for a writing project and it's 2 painters, 1 sculptor, 1 dance artist, and 1 filmmaker, and I'm applying for like, oh, I want to write these short stories. I mean, that doesn't mean I'm not going to get it, but you know, let's say that were to happen, but then I got rejected, maybe because I just wasn't using the right language, or maybe they didn't understand it, or for whatever reason. And then the next year, maybe they have a writer, or maybe they have someone who is at least like amenable to my cause, right? Mm-hmm. And then that might work out. And so the point being, like, apply often and apply to as many things as possible. The strategic part about it is if it costs money and if it costs time. And so, Julia, maybe you can maybe expand upon this, but my general rule of thumb is that I don't pay for grant applications or contests or anything like that if the reward isn't kind of on a scale to it. So if it's like one thing that I've seen that I really don't like is like, oh, a residency, you pay $50 to $75 to apply. And then once you get it, you then have to pay $1,000 or $2,000 to like do the residency. There's pros and cons to those things, but I tend to not do those things. What about you, Julia?
Yeah, I would say the same. Every once in a while, there are opportunities that come up that seem a little bit like they're just kind of pumping artists for money. But in general, you know, if it's an application fee of something like $20, and often they'll tell you something like, we institute an application fee because we pay our panelists, and the panelists are artists, and you want those people to be paid for their expert time. that they take to look over, 700 applications. And if you can't afford it, then you can also contact the institution and say, and ask, is there without paying the fee? Because some of them will even do that for you if you're in need. But yeah, I rarely pay for something that is above $30, maybe. It depends, but I may be more willing to pay if let's say it's a juried opportunity with a curator. Since I'm a visual artist, it's a curator that I know their work and really respect them and really want to get my work in front of them. Then that might be worth it to me. But be wary of things that have large application fees, and then you have to pay for shipping, and then you have to pay for your resident, like once it's fee upon fee upon fee, then it's really not about, it's not about you and your work. It's about just basically having like an artist's Airbnb or something. I see a couple more.
Yeah, so we're going to get into some of the viewer questions, and we'll have any parting words, and then I'll show you some resources, and we'll call it a day. But one question that we have is from Marci: is now a good time to ask for money? So I can answer the particular, maybe individual artist kind of grant or asking for money. I don't know if you want to get into the organizational aspect of it.
Okay.
Julia, or either or both. But please.
Oh, you want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. So organizationally, we are still asking for money. It depends on your audience. Are you asking your patrons? Are you asking your audience? Are you asking a foundation? You don't want to necessarily ask a population that is really hurting right now. So I wouldn't ask, personally, I wouldn't ask my friends right now who are artists who have been laid off and are suffering in COVID-19. I wouldn't make a Kickstarter project right now and ask them all to fund me, right? But if you're working on a project that is unique to this time of quarantine and is helping people in a unique way by providing resources, then yeah, that's a great idea, and that's something that should be funding. And anybody who's offering funding, you should definitely take it. And it doesn't hurt to call or maybe write a letter of inquiry asking. All they can do is say no. Right.
Yeah. To kind of expand upon that, is now a good time to ask for money? Well, yeah, like as Julie said, it depends. And I'm going to do a share screen just really quick, just to show some stuff that's available now in regards to grants and how this can be applied. But today, if you apply for the Artist Resource Newsletter, you received it hopefully this morning at 9 a.m. If you are subscribed, you received it. If you haven't, more than enough time to subscribe. And also do during our artist resource roundups with Reyes, with me, you get some of those opportunities if they're available. And so just to do a quick share screen, and Julia, again, feel free to jump in anytime, mm-hmm. and also kind of explain some of the stuff that we covered in the presentation. And so, for example, right, this is one, right, that's available right now, the Let Creativity Happen digital grant. And so this one, it's due May 18th. And so this is a good time to apply. They're still offering it. And as you can see, they have a huge, like, well, not huge, but like a reasonable amount of questions in regards to what they're asking for. So here you'll see that, again, project summary, and then you'll get the detailed description, and then the digital platforms, blah, 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 right? And so these are a wealth of questions, right, for their own purposes and what they need. But then, like, for example, this has a long, been. The due date was a while ago, but again, it's every year. So this is something to get ready for, right? We're Creative Capital, but the thing is that the way they ask questions is like little ones, like just a bunch of mini questions that are short. So 50 to 250 words each, some 100. But again, it might take a minute, much longer than, let's say, other ones to apply for. So get ready for this one. This one will be coming up probably next February. But again, this one takes some planning, some forethought to get into. Another one is, let's say, the Yes Contemporary Hyperallergic Art Writers Grant. I've actually received this one, but this one, and this is for art writers to write about Salvadoran artists or art. But the particular one about this one is that it's just your name, your email, your phone number, and 150 to 200 words idea outline, and that's it. So the cool thing is that it's quick. The con is that that's all you get. All you get is 150 to 200 words. And so you can see the range of like the length of grant applications. But in regards to answering Marci's question, yes, there are places that are accepting applications or accepting requests for funding. And I advise you to go to our website, fresharts.org, go to our Artist Opportunity Board. And to answer another question that's on the stream from Tamara is, job opportunities. Yes, anything in regards to what we find in terms of job opportunities will be posted on our Artist Opportunity Board. I'm trying to get that loaded up for you. But again, you can subscribe to our Artist Resource newsletter, where if we find anything, you will get it first Thursday of the month. And so I'd look here. This is a good place for grants and for places to apply to. As far as jobs, again, apply to as many newsletters as you can. Look at your favorite places that you want to work for and just really check in regularly with them if they have any job openings. That's another thing I advise. And so I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Julia.
I think, regularly checking in with in terms of jobs with places that you want to work is a great idea, because they're not always going to post or put out a really public posting, but they may have it listed on their website instead. And if you dig into the website, you can find it. Yeah.
All right. So wrapping up, we went a little bit over time, but I think it's been a great discussion thus far. Julia, any last or parting words that you want to give?
I think just dig in, if you've never written a grant before, or if you've written a couple and you've been rejected, it's all about practice, and as an artist, as a writer, as a composer, as any kind of creative person, that practice is a big part of what we do. And so you will get better at it the more you do it. And you don't have to start with your final text. I think Reyes gave you a great way to start thinking about it and kind of ease yourself into the writing, rather than looking at a blank page and trying to knock out a proposal from the blank page. And use your community. Use your friends, use mentors. You can even reach out to someone that you don't know very well, but maybe is an artist in the community that you've seen, or maybe you've met them once and they won an award and you're applying for that award. You'd really love them to read it. Reach out. Oftentimes people will be nice enough to say, yeah, sure, I'll read your proposal. And if they don't, then you tried it and you'll feel more comfortable doing it next time.
All right. Well, Julia, thank you so much. Thank you for your insight, your expertise. You also created a project budget toolkit for us, and I'll get into that as we move forward. But again, thank you so much. Sure. Maybe I'll see you in the office someday.
Masks on, yes.
Masks on. All right. I'll see you later, Julia.
Bye.
Have a good one. Yeah, so there you go. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over just really quickly over some resources that we have online, digitally, and that way you can get a better idea of what Fresh Arts does regularly, what we've always been doing. And so we've been doing this. I've been usually doing this workshop in person, but now you got a taste of it digitally. And so one thing to keep note of, again, is our Artist Resource newsletter. You can find today's Artist Resource newsletter at a link that we can drop right now, right there. So feel free to check that one out. Plenty of opportunities to apply to. We have some really great ones, and it looks like that. So please check it out. Please apply often. Apply as much as you can. Again, as Julia said, the more you apply, the better you get at it. But also, it's a numbers game. The more, again, it's just a matter of percentages. It's a matter of numbers. The more you apply, the more likely you are to get something. It's very rare that I've seen someone apply once and get it their first time. So don't be discouraged. Keep going. Keep applying. And this is a great place to start to look for those opportunities to apply to. Just to give you, I'm going to do my share screen to show you where on our website you can find this toolkit, and including and also Julia's. So we have a resource library, and I'll show that to you right now. And so this is our artist resource board, opportunity board. And again, you can browse by discipline, or you can browse by type of opportunity. And so if you go to fresharts.org, so let's say you're starting just from the homepage, you go to Succeed as an Artist, you go down, and to the right is the Artist Resource Library. And from here, once you click on that, you'll be taken to the library itself. And we've broken it down into different categories that we hope is very navigable. And so for a lot of the stuff that we went over today, I would go to the finances and budgeting. So we're going to click that. You can give it a little load. But until then, again, oh, here we go. And so here we have the grant proposal writing toolkit. Once you click on that, you'll get today's workshop as a toolkit form. So we had a really, really great graphic designer go through and put that into a toolkit that you can read, that you can fill out if you want to print it out. If you're more of a person that you need to write things out, this is great for that. But here are the questions that I posed, the writing exercises that I put, and you also get a different example of a grant proposal that I've done in the past that has been funded as well. So you get some insider tips from people in the community, like the HAA grants manager, Yedi Guevara. You'll get tips from Houston Poet Laureate Leslie Gutierrez Shorts, who sat on many panels. You'll also get some links to other places that do have posting boards for opportunities such as jobs and grants. And finally, a term glossary for any words that maybe you might not know, or if you do know, you maybe get a different perspective, right? So what exactly is a budget narrative? What is an in-kind donation? I didn't know what that was for a minute, but yeah, hopefully you'll find that useful. And also you'll have a project budgeting toolkit that Julia, with all her knowledge and expertise, was very kind to create. And you'll have a budget, how to put together a budget from the beginning. And again, you've seen her speak, so you know this stuff is good. So again, check out our resource library. We have a wealth of other information that is free, that is available to you. And we really do hope you use this. Oops. All right, so there you go. There are the links down here. You'll probably get them on the comments below or on our resource page. So again, visit fresharts.org, check out our library. And that concludes that. This next Thursday will be our discussion with, and Bubba, you're gonna put it out? There you go, amazing. The fundraising in the arts during times of crisis with our special guest, Amy Lampy. So again, next Thursday at noon, same time, same place. Fundraising in the arts during times of crisis. That'll be really, really great. As an addition to this conversation that we had today for grants, this will be fundraising in a different context. So that'll be great. As you know, always a great discussion. This Tuesday will be resource this coming Tuesday rather, will be the resource roundup with me, Reyes, and I'll be going over the artist resource newsletter that went out this morning. Feel free to check it out, but then I'll be going over it more in detail this coming Tuesday to give you some ideas, to give you some ways to navigate those different grants that are in there. So that pretty much calls it out. That's done. Hopefully you found this useful. Feel free to ask us questions. Feel free to give us tips. Feel free to submit any questions, concerns, anything, any topics that you want us to cover. We have a form just for that. Fill it out, let us know, and please work with us. Give us anything that you, again, have on your mind. So again, apply. I hope you get all the money. I hope you stay safe. And until then, I'll see you next time. Thank you.